All right, before we do any introductions, is there anything else? What's that? Anybody?
Black cap chickadee.
Okay, I heard black cap chickadee. Anybody else agree? You all agree?
Yeah, sure.
That's a black cap chickadee?
Oh, yeah.
Wrong.
Don't know, that's fine.
It is a chickadee.
Yeah.
And that's right. That's why you're here. And that's fine. That's one to test it out. This is a series of pictures I took. I got a phone adapter for my spotting scope, so I was playing around with last weekend and got to take some pictures of my feeders. That is, we don't have black cap chickadee here. It's it's a northern species whose range tends to fade out in central New Jersey through middle of Pennsylvania down through the western Maryland area. Here we have Carolina chickadee. And to make matters worse, where the two slightly overlap in range, they hybridize. So I'm seeing some records of black cap chickadees appearing on this website called eBird, which I'll introduce a little bit later. And I don't trust black cap chickadees south of the Maryland line myself. Now, I'm no authority. I just, because of the hybridization, the hybrids can sing each other's song. They have some overlaps. One of the best ways to tell one from the other, if it's not a hybrid, is one by the brain, where are you? And the second by the bib. On the Carolina chickadee, where the bib meets the breast, it's a fairly well demarcated line. Sharp, in other words. In a black cap, it tends to be ragged. Bird is a little bit bigger and has a more ragged overall appearance. But anyway, that's our local one, and hopefully we'll see a whole bunch of them before this course is over. All right. How about that?
Yeah. Woodpecker.
It's a woodpecker.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Susie says downy woodpecker, that's correct. And it's our smaller woodpecker. It's about, 6 inches or so long. And there's some other characteristics which I'll explain in the field, but as most woodpeckers are, it tends to go up a branch or up a trunk, head up, with the tail being used as a prop. How about this one?
Downy, Mary? No, it's this. It's a female.
What's the difference? Big difference.
The red.
The red. That's right. Most of our male woodpeckers have red on the head somewhere, including the pileated, something like woody woodpecker, and some of the smaller ones. This is the female.
I can't hear you. You're not coming across.
Okay. How about the thornies? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. See if we can fix that.
I'll send her a message real quick.
Yeah. Teresa, you're kind of frozen now anyway, so maybe part of that, the connection. Any better? Okay. All right, we'll see what we can do here. This is kind of just introductory stuff. Anyway, that's the female, which lacks the red on the head. The rest of the pattern of plumage is pretty much the same as in the male. And we'll learn some more about how to identify that. Someone said hairy woodpecker, and it is plumage very similar, both male and female, but it's a slightly bigger bird, but more importantly, the hairy's bill is a good deal proportionately larger. Roger Troy Peterson called the bill of the downy woodpecker a bark sticker. All right, let's see if I can get this one to work. You see? Okay, it's hanging up again.
Try it again.
There we go. How about this guy? It's a nuthatch. Which one?
It must be, red, I don't see the white, is it the red breast with the white? Or the
Nope.
white breasted?
Yeah. This is the white-breasted nuthatch. Nuthatches, unlike woodpeckers, can go up and down trees either way, but they often go down head first. And they have a little chiselly bill. This is the common one that we'll see at our feeders most years. There seems to be an eruption of them this year. We had a record number on our Christmas bird count back, the St. Michael's count back in mid-December. So if you have feeders, this is likely to be one of the visitors you're going to be getting this winter, but it tends to be here all year round and tends to be here every day. As opposed to this one, this is the red-breasted nuthatch, and it has two characteristics. One is that nice buffy reddish robiny color on the breast. It's a tad smaller than the white-breasted, but also it has that white eyeline, which shows up quite well even at a distance, especially with binoculars. And like the white-breasted, it can go up and down trees any way it wants. It does not use the tail as a prop, and is very happy going down, head first down. So that's, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 species of birds that I hope we'll see not once, but many more times during the course. In addition, I should point out to you that here's a new term for you, that the red-breasted nuthatch in particular tends to be an erupted species. Its normal range, even in the wintertime, is north of us. And in most, at least every other year, you get some form of eruption where the population seems to increase in the wintertime around here. We believe it's related to the abundance of cones and similar crops up in the northern conifers, which may in fact attract insects, which then attracts the nuthatches. And in poor cone crop years in particular, these species erupt, as do certain types of finches, such as the purple finch. We have a big eruption year this year of red-breasteds. They started appearing here in September, and they're common. The neat thing about them, in addition to they're being very dapper, they're relatively tame. If you do maintain a feeder, they love peanut butter. If you do maintain a feeder, they'll scold you until you replenish. And they're here long enough in time, you can actually train them to come keep a morsel off your finger. They're very accommodating. So that's kind of a quick introduction before I even say anything about me and to this course itself, which is part of a series that we've been doing now for about 5 years called Birds and Birding on the Eastern Shore, introducing a lifelong hobby at this time. And this is basically part one of a 2-part course that's offered in collaboration between the Chesapeake Forum and the Center for Environmental Society, which I'm a senior associate with up at Washington College. This is a new version. I've done a lot of courses where we've had a field trip or two each semester, but also had 1 or 2 lectures, if not more, on various topics running from bird identification to ecology. I decided that the bird identification component wasn't just satisfactory in lectures, that we're doing this thing to get out and see birds. So that's what we're going to do this time. It's going to be really ambitious. We've got a series of 9 field trips lined up, bracketed at each end by the class itself. Before we go further, let's just run through some introductions. I am Wayne Bell. I am not an expert birder by any means. I work a lot with youngsters in the youth component of the Maryland Ornithological Society, and they can run circles around me. They have better eyes and better ears. I do what I can, but in a sense, I'm in the boat with you all in terms of being able to find and identify birds. So, but I get around, and we'll try to at least capitalize on that experience for you very much. I am not taking salary from Washington College. I retired there as the founding director of their Center for Environment and Society. I retired officially back in about 2006. The center is just getting a new director. I haven't met her yet. It should be really interesting. But I've always been interested since I moved from the Horn Point Laboratory to position at Washington College. I've been very interested in our local landscape, not just Chesapeake Bay, but the farmland, forest land, and other things that constitute the Eastern Shore. And you're probably going to hear me talk a lot about the importance of that working landscape in terms of birds and bird conservation. So that kind of introduces my point of view. And now let's go through who's here. So, and tell me, in addition to your name and anything else you want to say, are you a beginner or have you been birding for a while?
My name is Jessica. And I've been birding with Ann Walker, who,
No
and I've gone on the Christmas counts and I feel somewhat useless sometimes. So I go, there's a, and then it's gone.
Well, you got the eyes. That's
So
important.
I just want to kind of up my game.
That would be great. And of course, by doing that, you have to come back to the Christmas count year after year.
No, we get chilly at the end.
Well,
It's too nice and
great.
chilly.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'm Mary, and I've actually taken a couple of classes with Wayne before, but I'm still learning my birds, and I love being outside.
Super. Even in the rain. Well, the wind anyway. Next.
I'm Chris, and I'm Jennifer's tag-along, and I'm a beginner, and probably will stay a beginner since I'm not taking your course.
She's coming today because she's a good friend.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm Jennifer, and I live in St. Michael's. I lived here for about 2 years, and am a rank beginner, absolutely.
Okay.
And-
Good.
And it's brought my friend along.
Yeah. No problem. Susie.
And, yeah, I'm Susie, and I've taken many of Wayne's classes, and he is an excellent bird, an excellent teacher, I would say. And I also belong to the Talent Bird Club, which you might want to do, I've done Christmas counts. Just love being out and tagging along after Wayne.
Oh my, I have a great following. Thank you.
Speaking of that, I'm a groupie. I'm Peggy, and I've taken a number of Wayne's classes, and I'm still a beginner, and I just want to be out and somebody to point out, so I will be better at knowing things that on my own. So I'm so happy to be here and be able to look forward to going out.
But Peggy's late husband, John Ford, was one of my inspirations for doing this course, and also an inspiration in terms of how to serve a community. So it's great to have Peggy with us. Go ahead.
I'm Karen, and I've taken many of Wayne's courses, and I'm very, very excited to be here, and that we're having so many field trips this time, because we have such a great time, and birders are such lovely people. I think newbies will enjoy it.
My name's Jeff, and I'm a newbie, so I look forward to field trips. Everything I can learn.
You gotta protect me from this heroin.
It never seemed to bother you before.
Never did. We've always had a couple. Okay, the 40s.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, very clear.
Well, I'm Dennis, and Becky's here. She can tell you about herself. But we've been watching birds informally for a long time, and the little birds all the way up to the bald eagles and all that kind of stuff, and just looking forward to hearing more about them and learning more about their behavior. And just want to say hi to our good friends Jennifer and Chris. Glad to see you at a distance.
Hi, I'm Becky. I am a beginner, and I've been out several times with the Talbot Bird Club with Janet McDonald and really enjoyed going out mostly at Pickering Creek. So I'm looking forward to the outings.
Terrific. And can you hear us now, Teresa?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, Wayne. My name's Teresa Mulligan, and I've taken Wayne's courses before, and I still feel like I'm a beginner, but I totally enjoy going in the into nature, and Wayne is phenomenal. He is awesome. He teaches.
I'm humble. What are
I'm Ann Cannon, and I'm just looking forward to learning more about birding. I've done some, and I've spent my years on the eastern shore, so I'm looking forward to knowing about these various sites and what to find there.
Good. Well, we'll see plenty of locations this time around. As I mentioned, it's kind of an experimental format where we're going to be intense on outdoor field trips. I'm going to go out of my way to see as best we can the birds that we see well. This is not always possible, but we'll do our very best. I have a spotting scope. In fact, I'll be bringing a pair of them with me for more distant species like some of the ducks and waterfowl. But we'll also try to get them as up close and personal as we can. I have this little trick of chickadees scolding an owl, a tape that I play with so many eyeballs. Birds actually see us as a herd of predators. And so it's sometimes difficult with a decent sized group to actually get the birds in close enough where you can really see what they do and what they look like. So this call helps a little bit. It doesn't quiet them down very much, but at least they're close enough to be able to see as best we can. Most likely because we're going to a number of places where there's going to be overlap in the types of species that would be around. We'll probably see several species, maybe many, more than once. Better looks at sometimes than others. But the whole idea is to get you more comfortable with being able to identify birds, at least the common ones, to the point where when you see a bird that you don't recognize, you realize that it's something new and worth pursuing. So that's what we're going to try to do here. We need it because of the field component, the fact that we're not meeting in class again until the end of the course. It's really important we be in communication. If you didn't get my email announcing this class along with the revised schedule, be sure to email me so that I get your preferred email address and I can put it into my mailing list so that we're able to keep together. Prior to every field trip, and that includes the one coming up on Monday, prior to every field trip, I'll be sending out a missile about how to get there if you're not familiar with the location, a list of probably about 10 target birds we're going to be looking for in case you want to bone up on those before we get there, and any other pertinent information about the field trip itself. Also, weather is always a problem. I don't like to bird in the driving rain. The birds don't like to be seen then either. Otherwise, we tend to, go out whether it's windy or calm, bluebirdy or not, and cold or not. But precipitation, especially rain, or heaven forbid we get snow and it gets dangerous. Those are different bits. And what I will do if we have to cancel a field trip, I'll try to do it as far in advance as I can tell. And also, I will try to reschedule the trip. I realize that may leave a couple of people out, but it's better than not going at all. So all of that requires email. I do have a sheet for you. Many of you may have gotten this as an attachment to my last email, but I'll probably be doing it again. You can have that. And it has my email address on it. I'll be using my cell phone. I'm not a cell phone fan, but in this case, since we'll be in the field a lot, I may need to communicate if you have problems or something like that, or last minute changes, you can use my cell phone. I don't carry it on my hip very much, but with the adapter now that I can take pictures with, I usually have it on my body somewhere. So if you don't get an answer right away, I'll usually get a message or a text message. So that works pretty well. Email's the preferred way if we have enough lead time to do this. One of the big changes in the schedule was that after I had submitted this course and laid out a schedule, which appeared in the Star Democrat and elsewhere, my wife and I decided to try to book a tour, and we're going to off on the road to Morocco. Remember that movie with Bing Crosby and Bob Hope? The line I liked it best was, like Webster's Dictionary, we're Morocco bound. And that is going to throw in a little wrench in the monkey works after the first 5 trips. So let me just run through them, give you some idea of what these trips are about. On Monday coming, we're going to do, hopefully see some backyard birds, and we'll go to the Pickering Creek Audubon Center, which I know pretty well, and I know where birds usually are. I may get over there Sunday morning and try to scout them. But we do have a weather issue that should not affect the trip, but will affect what we see. The rain should be over with by sometime Monday morning. We start at 8 o'clock, and probably meet there at their parking lot, so you don't have to carpool if it's not convenient. And we'll try to find a place out of the wind, so that one, we can play the tape, and two, we can find where the birds hunker down. You'll learn a few tricks that birders use when the weather is a bluebird day to try to see some species, but it just might be more of a challenge than we can handle. Certainly give it a try. But they're talking about 10 to 15 mile an hour winds. Last time I was in Pickering Creek, we had that. We all froze to death. Anyway, the next day, though, we're going to go up to Jonathan Shaw and Ann Happerton's place called Y Farm, which I know that. Peggy, were you there? Have you been there? Okay. I know Susie has. Y Farm is a historic farm up near Centerville. The co-owners have done a terrific job in terms of trying to reestablish some grassland habitat, but they also maintain a fantastic bird feeder. And we're going to go and visit that for about 3 hours on Monday, the 30th of January. The last bird that I heard that they had there was a Baltimore Oriole. Should be in the tropics by now. And that's because they put out great jelly. And the Orioles like to eat that. So maybe they'll hang around, but they have a nice array of birds. 2 years ago, we had a white-winged dove, which is a western species, stay at their feeder about 3 weeks or so. So it's always worth a visit, and they're very cordial. On the 9th of February, we're going to go owling. And this ain't your evening after dinner owling. This is 4 and 5 in the morning. We're going to repeat the owling route that I do on the Christmas bird count, where we had 3 species. We had several, I think about 6 or 8 screech owls. We had a lot of calling, you don't often see them, a lot of calling great horned owls, and one place where there's a parliament of at least a pair of barred owls. And we're going to try to hit all of those things, hitting Tunis Mills about 5 in the morning and quitting about 8 o'clock. We'll drive that route, probably try to meet somewhere where we can carpool a little bit, because some of the places we're going to go require some turning around. But we'll do our best. We're going to do it early because that's been my experience, that we get a lot more noise from the birds. We have a tape we'll play for the screech owls, and horned owls and others usually respond as well. If you've never heard of Parliament of barred owls, it's something worth hearing. If these two dudes are going to cooperate, we'll see. On the fourth trip, on the 13th of February, we're going to go down to Cambridge, and a lot of people know about Oakley Street. It's named for Annie Oakley, who used to live there at one time. And this is a great place where you can see 4 or 5 species of ducks practically sitting on your hand, because the locals feed them. And ducks that normally would be a distant memory and a long way off come into there. Good chance to see some of the subtle differences in a couple of familiar species. And then, if you'd like to take pictures, that's a good place to do it. And then if we have, as time allows in that morning, we'll also look along the Cambridge waterfront for some other birds that might be close. By the way, if you drive over the Choptank River Bridge toward Cambridge, and if you can, and look to the right, you'll see what looks like an ice flow out of the middle of the river. That's about 4,000 snow geese. And if we're lucky, we'll actually see them come up, if that flock is there, come up, sort of flurry around while we're on the Cambridge waterfront. Okay, the 2 trips in red are all-day trips. One is on the 20th of February. We'll do another waterfowl quest to Ocean City and Berlin, Maryland. Largely for coastal waterfowl, which includes more than just ducks, northern gannets, and some other species that you normally don't see in the Chesapeake region. And then Berlin has a wonderful park that they put together from an old wastewater treatment plant. And that's real good for northern shovelers and some other species of ducks within reasonable viewing distance. So that, when I say all day, I try to get back 3 or 4 in the afternoon, not too late. But we do have to, it is bring your lunch tights. Then I'm off to Morocco. So this is where we've had to change again to try to get I'm trying to get one lead day so I can scout the place, and try to narrow down what we're looking for. So we're going to go after those pesky little sparrows, or as some birders call them, the LBJs, little brown jockeys. And we're going to look for them at the Oxford Conservation Park, which is a great local park to the town of Oxford. They're doing real well with it. It's also been a stronghold for regional meadowlarks in the wintertime, and there may be some other species as well. And by that time, several of the hawks and so on might start to get in the air, and we might have some looks at some of the raptors. On the 31st of March, Tuesday, we're going to go to the open country of Talbot and Caroline counties. I'm going to try to produce for you horned larks and pipits as our quest, but it's also possible some lingering northern species that are fond of open country and tundra when they're in the breeding season. This includes Lapland longspur and maybe even a snow bunny, or maybe nothing at all. But there are several haunts that the bird clubs do, and we're going to try to see if we can have a look at these species. Certainly we ought to be able to get the horned larks, if nothing else. Another all-day trip, a little shorter than the coastal one, will be to go to Blackwater. Some of the ducks will have left, but I call it a potpourri because there's a lot of other waterfowl, hawks, ospreys should be back by then, and a number of birds that breed there or are beginning to migrate in. So it's kind of a potpourri. We'll look around the visitor center and everywhere we can to see what this Blackwater produces. And then finally, I had 10 trips originally, but finally I just couldn't work them all in with the break in the middle. So we'll have 9, and the 9th trip probably will go to a local wastewater treatment plant, which sometimes are very attractive to wintering birds of all kinds of nature, including some rails and coots and things like that. So we may do the eastern one, I'll try to find out, but the one that's been best for birders has been over in Hurlock. So if we get permission, we'll try to go there. You can walk up on the berms and look over the treatment ponds, hold your nose, and maybe see something really interesting. So that's the layout of the course itself, subject to change if weather gets bad. And the final trip, number 9, I might switch if it doesn't look like the wastewater treatment plants are producing, and we'll go somewhere else close by. It'll still be a short trip. Most of the trips last about 3 hours.
I just had a question, like, especially the full days. I'm so used to the bird club meeting at the Acme, so we can, or you're not necessarily going to do that, right?
I may not do that in some cases. For example, for the owl, we might need what's called a pincushion.
Okay. Oh, but there would be meeting places.
There will be a meeting place so we could get together, and especially for some of these where parking's a problem. It's kind of your choice. I like you, I mask up a lot when I go anywhere, especially up in close quarters. So we'll kind of make a choice, and I'll make a recommendation as to when we really should carpool, or if it's not necessary.
Or
Go-
just caravan, I was thinking like.
Caravan, yeah.
So
And that would be great.
Get lost, yeah.
In the case, however, let's take the coastal thing. We inherited a condo apartment over in Ocean City, and I would have you all there for lunch, except we're going to repair the elevator and everything will be down. But I'll probably go there a day or so before to scout it, so that we don't waste a lot of time going to ponds that are not productive. We always get something weird over there, so hopefully that will work out. But yes, and you'll know all in advance whether we're going to have a meeting place where we can caravan, or whether you'd be able to drive to the place with good directions, where there'll be plenty of parking. The choice would be yours in that case. Okay, so there it is up there as well for those of you who are may not have seen it. You don't have to write it all down. If you, again, email me, and if you don't have a copy of this, I can send it to you as a PDF file, or I can even insert it into it so that we're all happy. Okay? See if I missed anything. Okay, after each trip, so I'll be busy, not only trying to scout ahead of the trip, ahead of most trips, but after each trip, I will give you a list of the birds we saw with a note or two about its identification that may help you sort of get familiar with the species. Again, while I may list 10 target species, it'd be great if we get them all. We're very likely to see twice that many. And there'll be species that, if you're a novice bird, that might be new to you. But hopefully, because we're going to enough local places, we'll see them more than once and maybe have better looks at some trips than others. Okay. All right, any questions about, that's kind of the organization aspect of it. All righty. Let's start with some sobering information. This paper, which appeared in 2019 in the journal Science, which is not a trivial place to put a publication like this, has now been cited a lot. It's even been used for fundraising by things like National Audubon and everything else. But the data are extremely rigorous, using various monitoring techniques, one of which I will show you today, eBird. The authors at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and elsewhere put together data and compared population trends for various species of birds over a period of about 50 years, starting in 1970. And they published this paper, which this is kind of almost like the abstract. But using all of these techniques, they found that a net loss from 1970 to for the next 48 years, basically, approaching 3 billion birds, a net loss in numbers, not of species, but of individuals. 3 billion, estimated to be about a third of the North American bird population. So if you're old like me, and you remember back in the days of your youth or something like that, and you were a birder then, or in your college years or your early professional years, you remember maybe in spring migration in May, the warblers dripping from the trees at times and the orioles singing around you and so on and so forth. If you go out nowadays at the same time span, it's not just that your eyes are worse and your hearing is worse. In fact, there probably are fewer birds overall. A terrific loss in our population of species, and one we hope we can reverse. The causes for the declines are many, and I won't delve into that. This is a course on identification, but they range all the way from habitat loss to changes due to climate change. And it's sobering to realize that the birds that we're seeing now represent only about a third of the numbers that we might have seen 40, 50 years ago. This is a graph showing sort of the decline itself, and it's color-coded in part, the various colors, to what they call the biomes or the biological habitats in which these birds occur. For example, the grassland birds occur largely in the Great Plains, and they have experienced the greatest decline. Somewhere over a percent change of almost 50%. The numbers of grassland species, and by the way, that includes species like meadowlarks as well as other types of things like the sage grouse, others are somewhat more famous. I found that, in fact, being involved with various birding programs over the last 30 years or so, that it was known that grassland species were becoming highly threatened and disappearing. Grasshopper sparrows in this region and others were declining, and yet Audubon and DNR in Maryland and elsewhere were all focusing on what they called the FIDs, the forest interior dwelling species. And they were concerned about the losses of species like wood thrush and red-eyed vireo and some other birds that breed in the forest, even though it was already shown that grassland species were declining much more rapidly. It really wasn't until almost a decade ago that Audubon and others began to change their tune and to focus in on these grassland species. And in this course, you're going to hear an awful lot, and I will introduce ecological succession to you at the end of this session. You're going to hear a lot about early successional species, grassland and scrubland species, and what we can do about them. I'm sure concerned about any species, forest interior dwelling, whatever. But in fact, these are the habitats that are in short supply, and they're contributing to the loss of some of the greatest groups of birds that we've had here. Okay? One of the other ones that's particularly of concern, the coastal species, the shorebirds that require habitat for stopovers on their very long migrations, so maybe almost pole to pole. We won't see much about that in this particular course, but in the second part of this course in the spring, we'll be looking at those again. All right, so that's sobering data. How about some upbeat data? There have been a number of studies in professional journals and elsewhere, and some popular summarizations, indicating that birds are linked to happiness. And I don't mean their happiness, I mean ours. These have been studies that have been done by folks who are into various types of mental problems and so on. Some of the work has been done in Europe, but one of the ones that appeared, as you might expect when you look at the findings, in the journal Ecological Economics. Come on, people. Try again.
Dr. Bell, we did get a comment from someone just a minute ago who said they think February 20th might be a federal holiday. They don't know if that'll affect anything.
No, I don't think it should not.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll double check that. I try to avoid that sort of thing. I don't go on weekends because then we get into traffic and other sites. Let's see if this will go. There we go. One of the findings of this particular study in ecological economics was being around 14 additional bird species provided as much personal satisfaction as earning an additional $150 a month. So hopefully by the end of the course, we're going to be rich. Wouldn't that be nice? But apparently, this is research. This is not just feel good. And it appears in a variety of places, various studies as well. Recognize those two guys, right? Okay, those are American goldfinches. And Andrea Mitchell, who is a professor in early intervention of mental health in London, says nature reduces stress by lowering blood pressure and levels of stress-inducing hormones such as adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine. Birds tend to lure people outside, and outdoor activity improves mood through exercise and socialization. Welcome to the club, you guys. Makes me feel good. And they actually, in this particular article, they list 5 things you can do to benefit from this. One is invite the birds to you. And that means backyard feeders, bird feeders, that sort of thing. And if you can't put a feeder up at your own place, you can visit places like Adkins Arboretum or Pickering Creek, where they have active bird feeders, and take that as an invitation. So invite the birds to you. That's very satisfying. I find it so. Learn your favorite bird songs. There are apps that allow you to do that, but in general, I would turn it around and say, know your favorite bird and learn its song. And you can get that information online in lots of places. I'll show you one of those resources later, so that you get more and more familiar. Most of the birds we're going to hear in this course are not going to be singing because they're winter residents, they're not on territory. So in the second component of this course, if all goes well, we'll start to hear a lot more bird song. But there are a couple that sing all year, and we'll look at those. How about that? I didn't write this. Keep a list of birds you see. A lot of people who enjoy birds keep a life list, or keep a list of the birds they see per month or per season or whatever. Having that list and watching it grow is satisfying to a lot of people. I'm not what you call a list hound. I don't really care how many birds I've seen, and I know a lot of people who don't care to list at all. But there are ways now that you can do this with minimal effort, and it's kind of nice. And you all who are maybe novices in this have the enjoyment of being able to get 10 new life birds a day, whereas if I get one in 2 years, I'm happy. That's good for me unless I travel somewhere. So that can be useful. And then you can make your yard or backyard or whatever, or where your residence, whatever it might be, into a bird sanctuary. And this can be done by basically planting native plants, putting some scrub, setting aside some land for scrub, whatever it is. Douglas Callamy, who's at the University of Delaware, who advocates for using native bird plantings as much as possible. He says to feed the birds, first feed the bugs. And this is what native plants do very well in terms of the types of insects that are adapted to them. Then the birds come in and feast on that. So there are lots of positive things that one can do. And of course, this not only addresses your own happiness or feeling of belonging, but also helps to counter some of the problems that we're encountering with the decline of our bird populations in North America. Okay. All right, any questions to that point? Okay, by all means interrupt. Thanks, Justin, for flagging anything that comes up. Let's talk about the tools of birding. I'm not going to get into a lot of the online resources. I will mention a few because I'll be using them in our field trips. But for the most part, let's talk about the basics. People like Susie and others have seen this before. This is about binoculars. And you may notice in here, there are actually two kinds of binoculars that you can see. The three in the front look like they have straight tubes, and the one in the back looks like it's offset. These, in fact, are both effective for birding. Most of the current birders and most of the binoculars that are now available are usually of the straight tube type, which are called roof prism binoculars, sometimes called compact binoculars, but be careful of that, because we're not talking about opera glasses here, or very small ones. We're talking about binoculars that are more streamlined. Poroprism is the other type, which has the offset eye pieces, and the light enters them slightly differently. In a poroprism, the types of prisms that are used bend the light inward to get to the point where your eyes are, whereas the roof prism binoculars, the light more or less it does go through prisms, but it takes a straight path toward your eye itself. Roof prisms are nice for birding because they're most all internal, all the moving parts are inside. And that's very nice because if you're out in bad weather or whatever, they can stand a lot more abuse. Most of the times they are armored and it's covered with a rubber coating. In poroprism, the focusing, you'll see the eyepieces move in and out, and that is an invitation for water to get in. On the other hand, poroprisms are a trifle brighter, the type of magnification and other characteristics of it. But again, roof prisms are perfectly fine, and they're the ones most birders are using nowadays. Okay, so this is a pair of roof prism binoculars, and they represent the kind that we often buy and loan or give to the youth birders that we work with. This particular pair, these are from Eagle Optics. That company went belly up a while ago, but I just bought my daughter a pair that are very similar to this that are marketed called Celestron, and you can buy those from Amazon and elsewhere. I'll talk about pricing in a minute. All right, if you're new to binoculars and don't know what's going on, what do the numbers mean? The two important numbers are the X by X numbers, usually 8 or 10 by 42 or 7 by 42. The 42 represents the diameter of the eyepiece in millimeters. And for most birding, 42 is adequate. Getting bigger ones adds a lot to the weight. Getting smaller ones makes the image darker and much harder to work with. So 42, if all things being equal, you should search for at least a 42 diameter ocular. 7, 8, or 10. Many birders, one of my best friends is a birder with 7 by 42 Nikons that he bought years ago. He says lots of good birds in these guys. The nice thing about that is they're nice and bright, the field of view is quite wide, and he's very good at being able to pick a bird out in a mass of twigs and other such things, even if the bird flits from one place to the other. Most birders find the most versatile ones are 8-power binoculars, 8 by 42s. So if I had to make a recommendation, that would probably be the one that I would recommend getting. I have 10 by 42s. I'm getting old enough and my coffee is such that I'm now having trouble holding them as still as I'd like to. The other thing with 10 by 42s is that the field of view is narrow enough that if a bird is on one twig and I get my binoculars up to my eyes in time and it flips, I have to search for it. Whereas with 8s and 7s, it's often the case that you just move a little bit over and you can see it again. So they can get frustrating. And although the higher power sounds like you'd see more, my eyes are such now that I'm not so sure. If I were going out and buying a new pair of binoculars, I would probably get 8s. So that's what's up. If you wear eyeglasses, which I typically do, this pair of root prisms, you can just hold them right up to your glasses, and the space between your eye and the ocular is such that you get a nice bright exit pupil, as they call it, the image coming out of the glass going right into your pupil as well. So it gives you a nice, bright, steady image. If you do not wear eyeglasses, you're lucky. Let's see if I can do it with these. Get these twists. The lens caps on a good pair of birding binoculars can twist out and increase the distance between your eye and the ocular so that you go like this. Now I have to do it with this other one here. I'll just do it with this one. Okay? So if you're not wearing glasses, you twist this out. If you do wear glasses, you twist it. Others pull, and they have other types of adaptations. Because you may hand your binoculars down or share them with another person, I strongly recommend that you be sure that you buy binoculars that have that adaptation. It's common, so it'd be more the exception that they would be. Okay, field of view, sometimes they're specified when you're buying online or buying from an optical shop. And generally, if you get a field of view that's greater than 350 feet at 1,000 yards, which is seldom any distance you're going to be using for binoculars. But anyway, that's wide enough so that when you're focusing up close on a bird, it's still a wide enough field of view that you can see more than just the bird. You can see where it is and what it's doing. Be careful with some cheaper binoculars that do not close focus. You want to be able to focus in at a distance of about 15 feet. For me, that's between me and that chair over there or that wall. That's usually good enough. If you bring the birds in close enough, that will give you a pretty good view there. Be careful of any type of binocular that won't get you that close. And if you have a chance, you can experiment that if you go to an optical shop or go somewhere where they're on sale. Usually online, they'll provide that information as well, or you can ask for sure. You can pay $3,000 for binoculars if you want Swarovski, but most of us are our age, our eyes aren't good enough to really appreciate that. It is true, you get what you pay for. And higher end binoculars definitely are great. But for most of us here, you can get a decent pair for a couple of $100. And the pair that I bought for my daughter, this is not them, but the pair I bought for my daughter, the Celestrons, were on sale and they were $95. Nice Christmas present for her. And they're very good. So really, for something under $200, you should be able to set it up, and it's an investment that will last a long term. If I were going to spend $3,000 on a pair of binoculars, I would take the savings that I by not doing that and put it into a spotting scope. It would be you'll get a lot more use out of the scope than you will with a $3,000 pair of binoculars. But it's your choice. Finally, just in terms of using them correctly, and I'm still guilty of this, we all get excited when we see a bird. But if there's a bird over there and I want to see it, what I try to do first is get an idea of where it is. Look for something in the background or twigs crossing or some kind of flag or some piece of landscape, whatever it might be. Get that in your mind. Don't look down. To pick up your binoculars, you'll see a lot more birds than I know that. And I still get really excited, there's a ruby-crowned kingfish. But probably the novice people that I've worked with, the first mistake they make is to look down and grab their binoculars. You don't need, they should be there, and this should just be grab them and bring them up to your eye. And that really is an important skill. When teaching the young people, that's one of the first things that we try to get through to them. And you know how excited youngsters can be. Okay. Any questions about those tools?
I guess a lot of people are convenience or.
Good. Yeah, the question had to do with do you want a strap like these? And this is what they usually provide when you buy them. or a harness. Overall, the harness works better. They wear out over a couple of years. The elastics get stretchy and they start to sag. But on the whole, it takes the weight from off of your neck to your shoulders instead. And once you get them adjusted correctly, they're a lot easier to use.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, my experience is they really do make a difference. They're worth every couple of years, maybe as many as 5 years or so. When they start to sag, you can't adjust them more. To buy a new pair, they're not that, new harness, they're not that expensive. I also, with mine, I've taken safety pins and actually shortened the straps so they work reasonably well. So yes, I would recommend the harnesses if you can get them, and you would have to buy them separately. Buy the harness separately. Okay? All right, of course, that's your basic tool. I won't go into spotting scopes because you'll get a chance to see what they look like in the field. They're going to cost you a good deal more. But if you really get into birding, it's a nice investment to make for your future endeavors, and certainly it will help you with birds that you see at a distance, such as waterfowl and shorebirds. Books. Roger Torrey Peterson in the 1930s broke new ground when he introduced a field guide to the birds. It's still in many ways the Peterson Field Guide series. He's long gone, but the Peterson Field Guide series is still, in a sense, the Bible of beginning birders, if not for seasoned birds as well. Newer versions than the 1930s editions have done such things as putting birds' portraits, many of which were originally painted by Peterson, opposite the species descriptions. So when the book opens, you see both. Peterson's approach was what we would call field marks, the idea of pointing out certain and a limited number of traits on the bird or its plumage or perhaps on its bony parts like the bill that are definitive, especially if 2 or 3 field marks can be seen together on a given bird. That usually narrows down the identification to 1 or 2 species. And so here's an example here when I was doing this for the waterfowl course. For the American black duck versus the mallard, he's pointing out the field marks here of a very dark body. He's also in the upper right of the black duck there, upper left, sorry. You can see the white wing linings when the bird is flying in contrast with the dark body. That actually is a very good mark. As opposed to the mallard with its green head and neck ring, or the pintail with a pointy tail and a very different pattern on the head. Those field marks were great, and they really made birding much more accessible to a larger number of people who didn't have to read through big descriptions of all the feathering patterns and things that used to characterize the early bird books. Peterson is still a great guide. If you were to buy it, it's not that expensive. You can get it at Blackwater, among other places at their visitor center. Try to get the most recent edition. It comes in an Eastern and Western version, and I strongly recommend that you not buy a field guide that covers both East and West. It sounds like that's really efficient, but it doubles the number of species and possibilities. And unless you're going to go out west, and even if you do, it's better to buy a Western guide, which has got written a lot more for the birding that's out there than trying to combine the two. There are a number of books that do that, and so it's really your choice. But it adds 1 to the weight, and 2, it minimizes some of the descriptions because it tries to cover somewhere around several hundred species of birds instead of 200. All right, that's the Peterson approach, and there are others that use photographs. Be careful of photography books that deal strictly with photographs because they're picking the best picture, which is something you almost never see in the field. They're picking the best picture to try to accentuate the marks and the appearance of the bird and make it pleasing. It's not necessarily typical of what the bird looks like or what it does, and in addition, it photoshopped it. So it brings out coloration that might not be quite as evident in the real thing. One of the exceptions to that came out about, now it's about 10 years old, by Richard Crossley called his ID guide. This is too heavy to put in your back pocket. It's a nice addition to a car. But the Crossley ID Guide is a compilation of Photoshopped images. All were originally photographs that are put together against a background of habitat, which is typical of where the bird might be found. In some cases, that nevertheless, the other nice thing about Crossley is that while his species descriptions are very terse, at the bottom of the page, are very terse, they're right to the point. And in addition, he shows images of the birds further away, almost to the point where they're too far away. You need binoculars to look at his picture. But this is the northern pintail, showing the birds as they might appear in a field guide up close, so you can see the overall pattern. And then examples of how the birds cluster together, how they group together, and even how they look like in flight at some distance, which is something more like a hunter might see. In addition to, let's see if that's the particular one shows it. Does he have any tipping up? Yeah, there's a couple that are tipping up. For reasons you'll see in a minute, pintail, you often see just the butt. But this gives you some idea of what the patterns are at a distance. And at times that's really helpful for saying, gee, I didn't see the bird that looked that handsome that close. I saw it more like the birds that were flying in the background. And yet Wayne said those are pintails. And how did I know that? All right, let's compare the pintail with another common winter Chesapeake Bay bird called the canvasback. Used to be the bird of choice for eating. Unfortunately, it's changed its diet from wild celery grass to clams on the bottom. It's become a lot stronger in terms of taste. But the field marks of the two head, these are things Peterson might. The head color, the pattern of the head. Pintail has that stripe up the back. It has a white breast, for example, as opposed to the canvasback's dark. Other features, the canvasback, and this is one that's really key, has this Roman nose, sloping forehead, kind of unique in most of our waterfowl around here, whereas the pintail, mallards, and others tend to have a fairly abrupt forehead. The back, pintail back is darkish. Canvasback is canvas. Canvas used to be a very white type of material. The tail, canvasback, you can barely see it. In the pintail, it's long and pointed. And as I've mentioned, the head shape in terms of the overall shape, but especially with that long, elongated nose. What Crossley and others are beginning to focus on quite a bit are what is called the gist. The general impression, size, and shape, a term that was borrowed from aviation back in World War II when one had to identify planes flying overhead in the dusk or at night and to get a general idea of whether they were ours or theirs and what kinds of planes they were. And so that has been transmogrified into birding. And so very often when we're in the field, I may ask you or tell you about the gist of the species we're looking at. This has to do with the general shape, the behavior. For example, whether this is a diving duck or a dabbling duck. A pintail is a dabbler, and as a dabbling duck, it has to tip up and reach the food, the grasses, and the crustaceans that are in the mud within reach of its long neck. Whereas a diving duck can jump up and dive, go below the surface. That's a canvasback would do. So as I said, you may see a lot of pintails that look like this. At least temporarily. And the habitat. Canvasback and many of the other diving ducks like saltwater or brackish water, especially in the winter, and in the summertime, and pintails are more freshwater because the water tends to be more shallow and they can reach the bottom. Those are all really great clues for being able to identify a species. And you don't have to memorize all those. In time, the gist becomes like being able to recognize your best friend walking down the street. It gets to be that familiar. And here's a good example. This is what you might see in a nice pair of binoculars when you're looking out a couple of 100 yards away at these ducks. Okay, change the light a little bit, you're looking morning or evening, suddenly some of the patterns disappear a bit. add a little bit of fog. And basically, the general impression, size and shape becomes your larger ability to identify. Of course, you see a mallard up close and personal like that, you probably know what he is. But, and at Oakley Street, we will. But nevertheless, a lot of the waterfowl and other birds, big birds, bigger than robins, that we're going to see, are going to be probably better identified by their overall general impression, size, and shape. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a moment. Any questions about the identification we're going to look at? I'll mention a couple of apps that can be used on phones and so on that may be helpful, but I'll tell you, the satisfaction of identifying a bird comes from your ability and confidence in being able to do so on your own. You don't necessarily have to have an app to identify a cardinal. You don't necessarily have to have an app to tell black-capped chickadee from Carolina chickadee if you know where you are. And so I'm going to be emphasizing, I'm not anti-technology, you'll see I'll be using some in the field, but I'm going to be emphasizing you and your skills and your ability and your confidence and hopefully your enjoyment, rather than the frustration of saying, I don't know what that bird is, let's see what the Merlin says. And so let's have a look at some of this. One of the resources that you might like to go to,
So
click on that.
I'm just going to pause it, reset the share, so it'll share the sound of the movement.
Okay, good. We're going to go to the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, which is the premier source of a variety of things, including eBird, including the so-called Merlin identification app, and so on. Clicks on that, we'll go to, hopefully, there it is. We'll go online and go to the Cornell lab. Now, I can't control that, right? So
I can.
Yeah, no problem at all. So this is their home page, and they will immediately solicit a donation from you. But I'm not here to sell that. What we want to do is go up to All About Birds. All right, and then if you drop that down, drop that menu down. Oopsies. Sorry. Go back to that. All About Birds, drop the menu down, and we want the top bird guide. Okay. This is a website worth exploring for lots of other reasons if you have time sometime and there's nothing good on. But this is the bird guide part of this. And what I want to do is to identify northern mockingbird. You can just write mockingbird. Okay. Okay, it'll come up with that. And just click on northern mockingbird. Yeah, it'll go for you. There it is. If you scroll up just a little bit or scroll down, most of you will probably recognize this bird. This is the bird that sings all these very, very ventriloquistic varieties of bird songs. It has perhaps 200 different birds that it imitates. When I hear one, I can sometimes identify 5 or 6 that that particular bird is imitating. Its range has been expanding northward, but basically it's found across the continental United States. What I want to do is just play the song. So if you go back up and go to listen. Now they'll start singing. Here it's imitating a blue jay. Not sure what that is. That's a Carolina wren. That's a flicker. Sort of a cardinal. You hear the phrases are reproduced, are repeated 3 or more times usually, so that its rhythm is in 3s or longer, and very complex. Okay, that's the northern mockingbird, and even if you didn't see it, you'd probably be able to recognize the song. Okay, let's go back up to search on the right side. Great. And now you can type in brown thrasher. That's it. Okay. Very different in appearance, but often sometimes hiding in the bushes where it may be singing. In the spring, they slowly work their way up the bush to the top, and you can see them sitting up there singing. It starts singing in late February and March, so hopefully we'll be able to see someone have a brown thrasher day. It's obviously very different looking with a nice long tail, streaks, not spots on the breast, that long bill, and let's listen to its song. Different rhythm. Tends to repeat twice, not 3 or more. With this. This bird arguably has a much more versatile imitation and mimic than the mockingbird. Individuals have been shown to learn up to 1,100 different calls, well above 4 or 5 times more than what the mockingbird does. But it doesn't have the long rhythm, it has a rhythm and twos. And, okay, let's go do one other one. All 3 of these birds will go up to search. Thank you, Justin. And catbird. It's actually the gray catbird. That's how they'll come up.
This is just, oh, there we go.
Yeah, gray catbird. All right. A little smaller, actually, than the other 2, but also very distinctive. No streaking on the breast, a lovely black cap, and if you can look under the tail, shame on you, but it has rust underneath. Let's listen to this guy. Almost no rhythm at all. And the mimicking is hard to do. It's more or less like a series of squeaks and battles and things like that. Okay, all 3 of these birds belong to the same group. They're all called mimic thrushes or mimics, and they're the ones that occur regularly in the east. We should see them all by the end of the course, and with a little luck, we may hear them all. Catbird and brown thrasher winter a little bit here and then further south. Mockingbirds tend to be here all year. The other 2 begin to return late February, depends how warm it is, but late February to March, and hopefully at one of our locations we'll be able to hear and see them all. But here I'm just homing in on the calls, realizing that we're dealing with birds that tend to sing either in suburban neighborhoods or brush areas, second growth, if you will, scrub, and sometimes not easy to see, but if you can't see them, you can usually identify the fact that you've got a mockingbird or a brown thrasher or a catbird. So one group that on some field trips, we get them all. Okay, I wanted to do one other bird here. Let's go up to the search again. Let's do Carolina wren. I'm going to do this because it's one of the few birds that sings all year for us. There you go. And it's our largest wren in the east. It's not the largest in the country, but it's the largest in the east. A very dapper, nice rusty brown on the back, longish tail. After you get to know a wren, you'll realize that wrens usually cock their tails up, so that's identification that narrows down the number of species from half a dozen to 1 or 2. As I say, it sings all year. This time I want to go to the sounds option because the example they give you doesn't show everything I want to show up here. Okay, if you scroll down there a bit further, just pick a song Northern. Let's pick the first one. I like to call it tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. My wife said no tea kettle understands like that. But it has its own rhythm. It's nice and ringing. They'll tend to come from woods and wood edges. The birds are fairly curious. They'll tend to come in when we play our tape. And there are lots of dialects and variations of this. If we now go down to the duet, the first duet, which is the third option down. Slightly different, it still has some rhythm. But you hear that other trill? This is a duet. Only the males sing the tea kettle. The females answer with the trill. So the male is singing on territory somewhere in the female. Cool. And as I say, they sing all year, so we're likely to hear them anytime. Hopefully we'll hear some on Monday, since they're common over at Pickering Creek. Okay, let's do one other that we're likely to hear, just so I can get you familiar. Let's go back up to the search. Okay. And let's do Bluebird. And then when you get the options, we'll do Easter. There you go. All righty. Once again, I want to go to sounds because they don't start singing until late February. So we have to go back. It's up top. Yeah. There's also lots of other information about these species, which gives you a chance to, if you know this resource, when I give you the target birds, you can go and look them up. Let's do the calls Easter. This is what we're likely to hear. We're settled. We're likely to hear it coming from over the fields or even flying overhead. The song is kind of an elaboration of that call, and they'll start doing that later in the spring, and hopefully we'll have a chance to hear that. But when we go to Pickering, where they have a nice bluebird trail there with lots of nest boxes, we're likely to hear that call. Okay, let's go back to the presentation, if you will, and we're going to go to the other link, which is to eBird. Okay, so the next slide. There you go. Click on that, and we will go to eBird, which is a subset of Cornell Labs information. And what I want to do is enter my eBird at the top. Click on that. Top left. There you go. Okay. The username is Wayne Bell, small letters with a space.
Space in between Wayne
Space
Bell.
between Wayne and Bell. Okay. And then the password is CINDER, no space, BINDER. You all remember Cinder Binder? Now we have Daisy May. But anyway, that should sign you in. Yeah, okay. What I wanted to show you about eBird, because this is how I'm going to keep track
Wayne, excuse me, could you repeat the password?
That's only for my account, so I'm not.
Oh.
I won't do that.
Oh, all right. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not that it matters. There's no money involved. Anyway, this eBird will keep track of your observations for you. So if you wanted to keep a list, you can do that. It will do it for you. You don't even have to ask it. This is a list for the region of the United States. I have seen 622 species in the United States, including Alaska. I have not been to Hawaii. And if I clicked on that, which I don't do, I don't want to take a lot of time, it'll give me a list of them and tell me the first time that I saw the species. And it can be sorted by the most recent one or by taxonomy or a whole bunch of other such things. It's my United States life list. I also have a world life list. Again, I don't do this just to keep lists, it just keeps track of it for you. And I'm getting close, so this will be fun. I won't get up in Morocco, but I'm hoping to go to Ecuador, Andean Ecuador next fall. And hopefully I'll get over 1,000. That would be kind of a nice thing to pass. And I could click on that and get the whole list of what I've got here. I can even enter historical birds. I actually entered some data back to 1955 when I had a little Peterson field guide and put notes in it about the first indigo bunting and so on and so on. And that's part of my list. The important thing is if we go over to the latest checklist, the unit of eBird is the checklist. So just click on the 12 there. Work. Yeah. This is what a checklist looks like. That happens to be, I was with the Talbot County Bird Club, and we were at Indian River Inlet in Delaware, and on this date at the time specified there, and all I have to do is eBird will actually tell me where I am and start to track where I walk for that list. A checklist is basically a list of birds seen in a given length of time over a given distance or not any distance at all, called stationary counts. And you just enter the data this way, and it keeps track of them, and then adds it up to your own list or your monthly list or anything else that you want to have. But that's the basic unit of eBird. And I just got an email today from Cornell giving us the statistics for eBird for last year. They have, it's a totally international program now, active in every country of the world. There are 1.3 billion checklists that have been submitted since eBird started 20 years ago. Imagine 1.3 billion. More than 225 million observations supported in last year alone. So you're joining an enormous community with the largest database about natural populations of any kind of organism in the world. And it's one of the things that was used to document that what was it, 1.9 billion birds lost. In only 20 years. It's an amazing resource, and there's lots more you can explore there. Cornell now gives you, if you're going to travel to Florida, you can find new places in Florida and see what birds have been seen there most recently or what birds are there on a general list. So it helps you target where, if you go birding, where else you can go. It shows you species distributions worldwide. It shows you range maps, all kinds of other information, all based on information submitted by people like you and me. This is a citizen science bit, not just professional birders. And if you say, all right, what if I accidentally introduced California condor down in Oakley Street? Well, there are vettings that are done, some of them automatic and some of them by professionals whom eBird has, their volunteers, that look at checklists that have oddballs, and we'll send you a short note saying, please define, describe, whatever, what you saw. And if it makes sense, if you're in like Flynn, and if not, it'll say, well, we can't count that. But it's a very friendly, user-friendly type of thing. And the kinds of comments that you get are not going to be like, are you out of your mind? Kind of comments. They'll be much more helpful, much more friendly. That's what eBird is about. And I'll be entering those data in the field on a little tablet, which I will then post to eBird when I get back, because you need internet access to do it. There is an app. You can download eBird to your phone. If that's the kind of way you want to keep track of things. I can't read the phone screen that small, so I mess with that. But there's also an app that comes out of eBird called Merlin. And some people in this course and elsewhere may be using this in the field. Merlin has the capability, if you take a picture of the bird, if you could get a good one, it'll help you identify it. Or if you record the sound on your phone, it will try to give you the species, or at least a list of species that it might be. I'm not loud about that because identification is made by Merlin. It's still in its fledgling stage. They're not necessarily all right. And I've noticed that eBird, the people who monitor the checklists, aren't accepting and confirming observations of unusual species that have been defined only by hearing it and using Merlin to identify it. I'm much more interested in your personal skill and your personal confidence and your personal happiness. But that's me. So that's the orientation I'll take in the course, but I have no problem if you wish to use these other resources in any way. And I'm also not arguing that you should get into eBird, but at least you should know what it's about and why I'm doing it so that we can keep track of the species we see. Okay? All right, we'll go back to the presentation. We're off the online stuff now. Any questions? All right. All right, the last thing I want to do in the 5 or 6 minutes we have here is to talk about ecological succession. This is the kind of term that will come up again and again, and I'll be talking about especially early successional habitats when we do a lot of our birding. So I can go back and run this. Ecological succession, in a sense, is an orderly process whereby habitats change over time. And the usual example and the commonest one is a kind of succession they call bare field succession, whereas a farmer's field is left fallow and then not replanted and allowed to go through this process. If that happens, we start with the bare field as sort of ground zero. In a year or two, and up to maybe 10 or 15 years, depending on exactly where you are, this habitat turns into grassland and then into shrubs. Shrubs begin to invade. The grasses usually grow first. They're often in what's called the seed bank in the natural soils. And then given the chance, they'll germinate. And then shrubs, sometimes also in the seed bank, sometimes from seeds brought in by birds, then follow those, or if you will, succeed them. In time, pine trees begin to invade because they like all the light that's available. There aren't shade trees over top of them. They like the nutrients that are available in these early stages, and they grow quickly. Our pine down here is loblolly pine. This is the pine you're likely to see if you travel over toward the coast on the eastern shore. If you're from New Jersey, the pine up there is pitch pine. If you go into the Virginia Blue Ridge, places like that, the pine is scrub pine or Virginia pine. If you go up into New England, the pine up there is white pine. And these all represent ecosystems that started out at some earlier level, not the mature forest, because pines are not good at succeeding themselves. They like too much sun. They're not that shade tolerant. And in time, therefore, the mature pines die out and they're replaced by, if you will, an understory of hardwoods that are kind of just waiting for a pine to die and open up to the light. And then they take off and you wind up with a forest that's often in this part of the world, oak and hickory. This used to be called an ecological climax. Most ecologists nowadays don't use that term because we're losing our oak trees. If you've been reading the Star Democrat and a couple of other environmental-oriented journals, oak trees are dying off here on the Eastern Shore for reasons that are not entirely clear. But they are, and they're being replaced by beech and maple. So as we continue to suppress, continue to let the forests go, they're still changing, and that will change the bird life as well. We often talk about setting back succession. Native Americans did that using fire. They would burn the forest or the understory thereof, and they would set it back to maybe a grass shrub or grassland type of habitat. Those are usually more productive, and they were responsible for the abundance of wildlife that the Native Americans capitalized on, and that the colonists happened upon when they came in. These are early successional habitats that are moving back toward the forest. It wasn't all the forest primeval. That landscape was managed by Native Americans. It continues to be managed today as what I call a working landscape. And when you think about setting back succession from older growth forests to earlier stages, that's the way to get habitat for this declining population of birds that inhabit grasslands. So we'll talk a lot about that. I'm not an anti-old growth forest type person, but the fact of the matter is that the loss of grassland and early successional habitats seem to be making much more of a problem for bird abundance. And I'll say more about it in the field, but in addition to that, basically it's the way in which you might be able to turn your yard into a bird-friendly habitat as well. What farmers are doing is basically setting succession back year after year by plowing up the land, starting back with a bare field, and then planting it with crops. So a cornfield is an early successional stage. Unfortunately, it's too uniform to be much in terms of bird habitat, but left to itself in 5 or 6 years, it could evolve into and develop into a climax. So here are some quick examples of this. This is a lawn down at Horn Point. This picture is about 30 years old. It doesn't exist there anymore. It succeeded, if you will, into other habitats. But the fact is they had a bluebird house there, and the bluebirds like those early successional stages where they can feed on lawns and get the worms and insects that they like. Here's an early successional habitat that a farmer managed. This is near my house, and this is a soybean field, which can be viewed as an early successional stage. The farmer let that go and harvested the soybeans. And so if we then look at the grass shrub we begin to see a more rank type of habitat. Grasses in much ecological succession tend to clump so that you have spaces in between. That creates hiding places for birds and other wildlife. This on the right is the same field left the following year when the farmer did not sow it and let it grow up into basically a hay field loaded with Queen Anne's lace, blue stem, and other types of grasses as well. Moving on further back to Horn Point, and often sometimes red cedars also come at that point. So we begin to see a scrubbier looking habitat. And in time, that will become more of a grass shrub. Here we see some trees that were in the seed bank. Those are probably pin cherry or other types of cherries that were sitting there, nice dry seeds in the soil itself, waiting to be germinated. Maybe some also were brought in by the birds as well. Here we see a field with the red cedars dominating that stage of grass shrub succession. And over at Pickering Creek, we may see the habitat of the meadow that they're maintaining now, where we get an invasion of sweet gum, a very thick kind of habitat, not the best for birds, but as you see, there are edges with pine trees around. We'll have a look at that. Eventually, we get into the pine forest. This is a forest that was logged back when Chesapeake Forest Products owned the land. The state now owns much of this down in Worcester County, and you can see where they left some seed trees, and underneath of that, the young loblolly pines are coming up. Here along Horn Point Road down in Cambridge, some mature loblolly pines. Here near Tillman, some trees that are along the edge of the road to Tillman Island were left alone. There are fields behind that, but these trees were left alone. You can see the size of these trees, which are probably close to 50 or 60 years old. This is near Hope House, where we're going to go owling, and here the dead trees that you see are dying loblolly pines, and the living tree, like the one on the far right there, is a white oak, which is replacing the pines. Here's another overview of that, showing the pines slowly dying out and the areas that they open up being grabbed by the hardwoods and following up with oak forest. And so sometimes these oak trees are close to 100 years old and are enlisted in the old growth forest network. Other times they're just simply allowed to go on their own and mature into the mature forest itself. This is a place to look for scarlet tanagers in the breeding season, as opposed, and other birds on the forest floor. But in the wintertime, it's a place where turkeys sometimes feed on the acorns and beech nuts underneath. That's ecological succession. And I'm going to be stressing that a little bit because, as I've told you before, I believe in the working landscape, that the diversity of birds we have here on the Eastern Shore, we may have lost some numbers. The diversity of birds depends on the diversity of our landscape. I can take you within 10 minutes to almost all of those stages, driving by car, showing that there are various stages ranging from bare field to old growth forest. That diversity is in part maintained by us, by the farmers and landowners who do the cropping, by the environmental organizations that argue for such things as set-asides, and critical area programs and so on. It's all diverse, but it's maintained because that landscape works for us. It works ecologically, environmentally, but it also works economically, culturally. So I'm a big fan of keeping it working. If we just set it all aside as a park, if we were to take the Eastern Shore and just say no more agriculture, to take a big extreme, our bird population would fall, our species diversity would fall. We wind up only with those birds that like the trackless forest. By having the landscape work and by having landowners who can profit from that, making it feasible for them to earn a living doing that, we also get to benefit. So when we visit these various places, we'll see set-aside, we'll see parks, but we're also going to see private lands taken care of by indulgent landowners. And all of those contribute to what is really the glory of one of the last great places on the Atlantic coast, the Delmarva Peninsula. I hope you'll be able to enjoy that and enjoy the birds that we find. Thank you all online. We'll see as many as possible on Monday. I'm pretty sure the default is always to do the field trip, and since it's pretty local, we'll probably at least try.